Well, and here we are. Good.
Here we
Well,
are.
I keep wanting to say morning. It feels like morning. I got up and played pickleball and
Isn't
woke
it
up.
morning for you?
No, it's 12:36 now. It
Oh,
feels it feels like morning. Um, what is today? Today is Friday, October 4th. This is the first time we've been at the other end of a Zoom on one of these in a while.
yes.
Definitely the
I think since
pleasure.
you were at my home.
Yeah, I guess we did the one that I still have to upload again because it got taken down because we mentioned something that we're not allowed to talk about. So Nami's already fixed that, and it's in my to-do list to just make it go live. So I'll probably just push that out tomorrow. Um, yeah, but that was fun too. That was a whole experience being at this fellow Dave's house and having other folks just. I just got to sort of sit there and be MC and let Kaylee, can I pronounce her name? Keeley. And now just getting to hang with us. So, anyways, okay, Sean. Um, what have you been up to in the last, let's just say week, because we did connect last Friday.
Uh, I've been teaching.
Mhm.
I'm alternating weeks in my class between more academic content about the Tree of Life and comparing the paths of intelligence in the Tree of Life to the channels and where they are in the Noble Energy Map or Human Design Body Graph. And then on alternate weeks, I'm focusing on reading the charts. And it's pretty interesting for me. It's a lot of work because in order to prepare for the classes, I'm reviewing all of my personal notes and going to my reference books and making sure that I've gotten all the relevant details.
Mhm.
And then I also check with ChatGPT and see if I've left anything out, or usually they leave things out or have errors.
Mhm.
But it's a very interesting study, and it's going to take me 64 weeks to get through the whole Tree of Life. And it's fascinating. I am learning so much as I'm doing it. And it's reinforcing the validity of the noble energy maps.
Mhm.
It's reinforcing the some of the integrity of the body map itself, and it's confirming some of the energy of the channels as described in the Tree of Life, and it translated into the channels in the body map. So, from many levels, it's a very important exploration. So, I've been busy with that. Last week, my grandson and his wife were here from Israel, and that was extremely, I mean, it was fun because Noah and I are so connected. And both he and his wife have 5 planets in the fifth house, sixth house in Aquarius. And when Noah was born, he had the sign of Aquarius over his left eyebrow,
Wow,
on his left eyebrow.
like Harry Potter.
So, and he's an Aquarian,
Hmm.
as you are. Uh,
Well, so I got to cut you off right there because I'm still kind of getting the whole themes of astrology and stuff. And so it used to be when, like, if I said to someone I was an Aquarius, they would say something and it didn't resonate. But now when people, if I tell them I'm an Aquarius and a Scorpio rising, they're like, "Ooh, I see it," and then they say something. I'm like, "That's exactly correct." So I don't know what that is, but so you just said he's an Aquarian like me. Stuff like that perks makes my ears perk up. So what?
a person who is now, I have an Aquarius ascendant,
Okay.
and my Venus is 0 degrees Aquarius right on my ascendant. So I have a very Aquarian nature. In other words, I think creatively. Aquarius as a sign is air. So what are the characteristics of air?
Light,
There, it's
dreamy.
light, it flows, it
Mm,
moves, we breathe it, and Aquarius is two squiggly lines. And it's the 11th house in the astrological native wheel. So a 11th house is astrologically ruled by Uranus. And it is a house in astrology we associate with community, friendship, um, the consciousness of community. In other words, it doesn't mean you need to have a huge community, but it means that you are concerned about the collective, that
mm,
you have a feel for the underlying connection of all humanity.
mm,
And Aquarius is opposite in the wheel to Leo, which is fire. What does air do? It fuels the fire.
yeah. Fans of
So
fire.
when you
Yeah.
begin to think about the energies in astrology, use common sense.
Mhm,
Don't listen to fake astrology, which is a formula. Think about the flow of the energy and how it might resonate with who you are. So I know, having spent time with you, Sean, that you talk about being unfocused, but we could also call that diverse and creative,
mhm,
where you're looking for connections between things that other people would not necessarily put together.
mhm. Yeah.
And that's the Aquarian nature. Look at my work. I'm looking at it from an angle that most people don't look at it from. And it's not that any one approach is right or wrong, but it's a question. And it's interesting because I'm working this weekend on the 30th path of intelligence, which is the collective intelligence. Now, we moved through in my classes the administrative intelligence that goes from the sacral to the root. And it's called administrative intelligence. And we could confirm in the body map that the energy of the sacral center, which is where the seat of our sense about ourself originates. In Eastern mysteries, the Kundalini moves up the spine from the sacral center. In the body map, the sacral is sitting there, very, many gates coming out of it, connecting to the splenic center, connecting to the solar plexus, but most importantly, connecting to the root. And then the pathways diverge and connecting up straight through the satsuma, the central column, the spine, in a double helix, and bringing together the worlds, all the worlds. So the sacral center begins to move the energy into the real world for us to transform our consciousness.
Mhm,
And it begins the process that we call in psychology self-actualization, or in Jungian terms, the process of individuation, which means we come into life and we incarnate for some reason,
mhm,
and we have something to accomplish. So many people who come to see me ask what their life mission is. What am I here to do? And I can see that in the body map, in noble energy maps.
Mhm.
But from the standpoint of the body design itself, the energy moves down through the root. And then the task we have is to take this raw energy of experience and align it with who we are
Mhm.
spiritually. Does it resonate with us? Is this where we're supposed to be? Is this our life mission? Are these the people who are aligned with us vibrationally and in our heart?
Mhm.
So the first path, the 32nd path, we're going from the sacral to the root with the inkling that it's not about just physical form, but where we need to get the lesson that we're in a physical body for a spiritual purpose. Then we move up to the splenic center. In the body map, we have 3 channels. In the tree of life, we have 1. But it's a path. Let me say the 32nd path is in Tarot, the 21st, the world card. As we move up Shin, the 31st path, it's initiation by fire. It's saying, do you have the ability intellectually, cognitively, to stop yourself from being an emotional, reactive, sleeping person? Or do you have the ability within yourself to know that you're above the gross physical world? And when you think about yourself as a spiritual being, you'll understand life and the tasks and challenges in front of you in a whole other way.
Mhm.
The 3 channels in the noble energy map or the basic human design delineate the 3 worlds: the spiritual world, the emotional world, and the physical mental world. And it shows us the task we need to accomplish in each of those 3 worlds that we then have to integrate in order to have the full understanding of who we are as human beings. And we then move into trusting our intuition. Now, the 30th path that I'm getting to this week, you're going to get a little preview,
Mhm.
is and the 31st path is the judgment card. Now, interestingly, the 5818 in the body map is labeled work on what has been spoiled, judgment. And it's a emotional world channel that is not related to personal experience. Ra didn't have that one right. Ra thought that the 5818 related to your personal parent, one of your parents who was judgmental about you.
Mhm.
Now, that could be or not be, but it is knowing internally if what the outside world is giving to you aligns with who you are as a spiritual being. And until you understand and embrace yourself as knowing what you know because you know it, and nobody can tell you you don't know it because you've known it your whole life. It's the you who knows who you are.
Mhm.
And you know it despite what anybody's told you. And the pain you feel is when somebody doesn't acknowledge it. So that's the 5818. The 2838 up that channel of Shin is the spiritual channel. It's instinct, and it's your instinct to survive. And so if you have an instinct to survive and something in your reality world, it feels like bullshit, it probably is.
It's so funny. I have so many questions, but
Well, before
I'll,
I move to the next channel.
well, I just want to, I just have to get this out, 'cause I don't even know if it's in line with what you were saying. But the whole time you were talking, the last 30 seconds or so, I was just picturing my pickleball game for an hour and a half ago. And just knowing what I knew. So I was playing pickleball, and for me, it's a fascinating playground to observe people. Because someone who was my partner 5 minutes ago and was rooting for me is now on the other side trying to kill me, right? Like it's quite literally, you're always switching.
Okay, so Sean, take a moment
Yeah.
and go inside and think about what you just said.
Mhm.
Where is that in terms of the worlds?
I would say, at least in that instance, it was emotional. And it was
Part of it was
sensing the
emotional.
emotions of people around me. They were they were fired up, and I could feel and see it and sense it. Like I frustrate people. So
And where was your consciousness?
I was actually really just enjoying the moment to the point where I couldn't remember what the score was. I just couldn't wait to hit the ball again. I was
So,
actually fully in play.
so what world were you in?
I'd say that's spiritual.
Yeah, and where were the other people who were competitive?
Uh, the one I'm thinking of was highly emotional.
So which world is that emotional if it's reactive?
Oh, if it's emotional and it's reactive,
He was reactive, correct?
she
She?
was intent on winning, particularly when her husband was her partner,
Hmm.
because he's very serious. Like it's an interesting dynamic when they play together. They
So
don't like
they were
to lose.
in an emotional reactive competition.
Mhm.
And that is not the highest spiritual energy.
No,
So they were in the mental world.
yeah,
Winning is discrete, but not the overarching rooting for everyone to do their best.
mhm. Well,
So,
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no,
Uh,
go on.
I was gonna say, so the woman on the other side is I think a retired doctor. She's very intelligent. She's very assertive, and for the most part, I would say high integrity. But she was cheating, and she pushed really hard. Like at one point, she was just dead wrong about a call, and she was fighting for it. And I had in that moment, I was like, I was a foot away from it. I saw it with my eyes. I know, and I still was like, fine, whatever. You can have the point. I don't care. I'm just playing. But it was really interesting because she just kept insisting, and then, but for the next 5 minutes, she was calling everything like counter to the truth, and I was just kind of watching her unravel a bit, and then she got frustrated, and then she just stopped doing it, and I think it was in the
She
moment
stopped playing or she stopped cheating
she stopped cheating, and she
because she
seemed to
was
have
winning.
relaxed. No, no, because I didn't like the cheating, so I upped my game. So I made it even more difficult for her. Like I was just like, I'm not. It was the kind of situation where in the past I would have let, especially strong women, I would let them walk all over me. I just was. It was just a behavioral pattern I had, and I just couldn't do that. So I just stood my
What
ground.
part of you couldn't do it?
The part that wasn't standing up for myself, the part that, and this is the conversation I was gonna alluding to before, when we were talking about courage, when we were at your house. Um, I just didn't have the courage in the past to just even go like, no, you're actually wrong. Like I felt like I was physically intimidating by disagreeing. Like I definitely get triggered by, there's a woman that was working with us a year ago that kept talking about how she didn't feel safe, but she was psychotic. Like the people that were unsafe was Wendy and I. But it was just such a, I just found it really, I just used to let it happen to me. But it was so uncomfortable, even standing up for myself, even in a moment like that.
So
Less
how did you
uncomfortable in
stand
the
up for
past.
yourself today?
I just didn't back down. But I didn't do it from a physical standpoint. I was just like, no, that was absolutely not how she saw it. She was 30 feet away. I was a foot away. I trust my eyes from a foot. Especially, yeah. It was just interesting. It was just, I don't even know how I got on that, other than you've been repeating for weeks and weeks to me, like when you know what you know, when you know it. And it was just like, I used to, I would know it, I would know I know it, and I would still sacrifice myself for the other person for some reason. My boundaries weren't there. So it's just, today was like
Well,
therapy.
Sean, we're not taught, and it's the primary work that I'm really doing, is letting people know that we have a roadmap for self-actualization. We live in four worlds. And because we haven't been taught how to use the integration of those worlds,
Mhm.
um, people are sacrificing their inner self and the core spirit, which were directed in ancient traditions to make priority.
Mhm.
And in bringing up children, parents do not make their child's spiritual growth. And I'm not talking about religious. Religion, the way it is taught and the way it is practiced, for the most part, is coming from a mental world where you can only get to the spiritual if you behave a certain way. And in the Bible, we're not, our relationship is direct to the divine. The divine spark is in each one of us. If it weren't, where did a life come from? Where did consciousness come from? We don't have a place in the brain. And we know that when people die, there is a soul and it weighs something. We have the weight of the soul. And we all, from the time we're infants, have preferences and choices that give us our identity. And so when someone like yourself is not recognized for the you feel inside yourself, it's painful.
Mhm.
And when you've attempted in the past to say, but wait a minute, if other people didn't listen, you ultimately keep it to yourself, but you don't stop feeling it.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that is different than conditioning and is actually socialization.
Mhm.
In other words, we learn every culture has practices, and many Aboriginal cultures have initiations and passages as we do in Western culture. Uh, in our culture, it's often graduating from one school and going to the next. But nobody really talks about the tasks you have to accomplish to shift your consciousness. So in Western culture, a lot of the focus is on intellect, but linear intellect, not spiritual intellect.
Mhm.
Whereas the splenic center, called HUD in the Tree of Life, is about knowing. And and when I first started to embrace fully the spiritual side of myself, I was having dreams of knowing with a K. I'd wake up in the morning and the only thing I would remember was the line, "You have to know with a K." And that's why I said, when you know because you know. It's knowing
Right.
with a K, a capital K.
So when you, the words you said there, when you started to connect with spirit, I thought you did from a very early age, right? Like we've always talked about how you just so, but was there a disconnect for you for a period as well? And then I'm struggling to
No,
find one.
but the the amount of time I could spend, um, I went from college to graduate school. The summer before I entered graduate school, I got married. And 3 years later, I had my first child. 4 years later, I had my second child, less than 4 years. And I was teaching college and working on my PhD and being a perfect wife.
Mhm.
So I was pretty immersed in the mental world and all the tasks I was involved in, but I was driven by the spiritual world.
Mhm.
And I knew, um, as I do now, for example, when I'm teaching, like this weekend, I'll be working on the 30th path of intelligence. And it's an intense piece of work. Intellectually requires me putting a lot of different pieces together. But I'm being driven to do it from a force that is not mental world. In the same way, I've said before on a podcast, I don't love swimming, but I'm driven to swim.
Mhm.
And that comes from spirit. Because when I'm in my pool, I have no external energy coming into me. It's completely silent. And I'm only with myself. There's no other energy.
Mhm.
So even when I meditate in an ordinary room, there's energy around. Objects have energy. The outside brings in energy, and I feel it. But when I'm
Mhm.
in the water, it's like it's like being in utero.
Mhm.
There's nothing else. And all I hear is the sound of my kicking or my stroke.
Right. Like do you, when you go swimming, do you have to drag your ass into the pool still? Like you know that you love it, you know that it feels great, but it's like my meditations lately have been fantastic, but then I won't do it. Like, and I'll be like, oh, I'm frustrated. I'm stressed. Why don't I go do it? And it's a chore, and I will
Well,
procrastinate.
sometimes you have to have a discipline that doesn't give you the choice.
Mhm.
I wake up in the morning and I don't even think about it. I meditate.
Mhm.
It takes me a good hour in the morning. to go from waking up to getting started with my day.
Mhm.
And that's because the first thing Marvin and I do is to pray and meditate. Uh, but your question, um, if I have the space in my day, I don't think about it. I don't have I don't give myself a choice.
You don't get in your head, your body just, you just go.
I usually like to finish work and then go swim. So I like to do it before dinner, before the bugs get bad. And it depends on what my schedule is. On weekends, I usually clear my schedule so that I can do it. And my preference would be, when we were in California, I swam every day. My schedule is a little bit more the weather and my schedule is more challenging here.
Mhm. Okay.
But no, it comes from a different place. You have to find that place.
Mhm. I want to circle back to almost the beginning of our chat then, because I didn't make this connection before, but I think you said it in yesterday's class or very recently. So I think you said so like air is the mental world, right?
No,
Effectively,
air is the spiritual world.
air is this
Leo is fire is the mental world.
fire. Oh, okay. I misheard that then. I guess where I was going with that is like I have a completely open head and ajna in the mental world. And I recognize that in the fully integrated, that is not the case. So that's new. But there's something about this empty goldfish bowl in my head that I can
You
get
haven't
caught
been
there.
taught to use it.
Yeah, it
And
feels like it's
that
super
is the
lethargic.
challenge. That is the challenge of HUD to the sacral center, the splenic center to the sacral center through the 5027 in the body map. And it's called the collective intelligence. And the task of this path is to take what you learned from the path of Shin and use spirit to determine how to be in the collective unconscious. Now, the collective unconscious is tricky because it's a channel, if you think about the body map, that is purely spiritual. And I've often said to people, if you have that channel, you wake up in the morning with a sense of angst. Like you have a task that you've been given, but you don't know what it is.
Mm.
And so if you have that channel, now everybody has it, whether it's activated or not.
Mm.
So in order for you to rightly direct your thinking, it's going to take you a moment. Is this something that aligns with me? Will this advance my consciousness? Is it the right direction? So, because you have an open head, I have an open head, empty. I can't think. And I've always said, I cannot think to save my life because I cannot, if you ask me to be linear, that's really hard for me. But you give me information and tell me to creatively put it together, and I love it.
Mhm.
So
Mhm. I know what you mean by that.
how you identify how you think or what characteristics you bring to the table are your choice. And when you know what you know, Sean, you know it.
Yeah.
So your mind may need more information before you make a choice. You're an open mind. How much information do you need before you know because you know?
Yeah. Despite frustrations in life, my life has been a lot of fun lately, letting go of being certain about anything. At some point, like I'm kind of like reliving my youth and kind of re-experiencing everything like with a fresh start. And I think I just had so many things that were like they might as well have been galvanized in steel, on a wall. Like I believe this, and none of it was mine. And so letting all that go has been freeing, but
Have
it's
you
a
looked
mess.
have you looked at the stepping stone paths taken and not taken worksheet that I've posted?
I'm sure I've looked at it, but not recently and not in this context. So,
Look at it in this context because if you jot down which world a transition in your life was, um, you will see what choices you made.
mhm,
And paths taken and not taken are very interesting.
mhm. Yep.
You know, I can look at my first marriage and understand 100% why it was the right move. Um, my first husband and I would not have gotten where we got without each other. And we had a good marriage until it wasn't. And it became challenging when I went on a spiritual path and he went on a more mental, physical world path. And we couldn't reconcile the values. And neither one of us were willing to compromise that much. But as a transition, it was right for both of us. And we had two great kids. And looking at, what was that about? I began to understand that sometimes a couple comes together simply to bring two fractals together. And I can see the struggle in my children between the mental material world and the spiritual world. And because of me as their parent, their choice has always been spiritual world, primary, mental world, secondary. And it gives them a lot to perceive and understand in having a parent whose values are somewhat different than theirs. But, and I was single for 5 years. Uh, when I met Marvin, and we've been together since the day we met, it was as though we were one person with the same values. And I don't think in our entire marriage we ever had an argument about values. Whereas we've had disagreements about other things, but we both make the choice to go with spirit over anything else in our life.
That's interesting. Yeah, Wendy and I have discussed our values. I don't think we've ever had arguments over values. It's always over finances and things we let others away with, and we took the fall. okay, I've wanted to ask you this twice now in this conversation, so here it is. So are there other gates or channels that represent integrity or having integrity more than others?
Mhm.
Because for me, seems like 46 is a gate of integrity. Like Wendy and I both have it. When I've talked to other people and I've sort of experimented with my feelings on it, I've always sort of said to them, like, I bet you'll do the right thing even if it hurts. Like if even if you get sacrificed for it. And that's always just rang true for me. But I don't know why I feel that and believe that. And maybe it's
The
perspective. Maybe I'm
challenge with the 4629 is depending on what planets are activating it. You may be more vulnerable or less vulnerable to sacrificing what's right for you for someone else. And if you do that consistently, it's not healthy.
Mhm.
So part of the 214, 731, 1333, 4629, 52.9, 63, that whole column, and of course the 15.5, because it's in every world, those channels are aimed at you being able to discern the difference between your highest spiritual purpose and direction versus the demands of the mental emotional world. And
Mhm.
so most of the people who have the 2946 often get pulled in to saying a precipitous yes without considering what aligns with them, and then having a discussion with the other people about how they can all get what they need.
Mhm.
In my early studying of communication skills, when my children were really young, and even though I already had my PhD as a psychologist, it didn't give me the skills to handle a temper tantrum
Mhm.
on a 2 year old, or to solve a dispute between children when they each were in the mental emotional reactivity, and I wanted them to solve it spiritually. And so I studied parent effectiveness training and reached a point in the organization where I became the training director in the organizational training section in Chicago, and became fairly good friends with Tom Gordon, who graduated from the same department at the University of Chicago that I did, as did Carl Rogers. So we were coming at it from a multi-dimensional perspective. And what I learned was that when different people have different needs, and those needs are going to come from who they are. If they're superficial, that's easy. But if they're more of a need connected with self-identity, you have to find a way that everybody gets what they need. And there is communication skills that allow you to do that without roadblocking the other person spiritually.
Mhm.
So a lot of times, name calling, denial of the other person's feelings, commands, um, those kinds of things kill the spirit.
Mhm.
And yet, that happens as a way to turn off the process that would take a lot longer to go through to get both people spiritually aligned. And if you're really spiritually aligned with someone you care about, and you know the consequence of your behavior on them, you're going to change it.
Mhm.
So part of this process of understanding the process of individuation is also knowing which skills to use
Mhm.
at which moment in time
Mhm.
to be able to deal in the world. Now, you can't really get there until you go through what I call the lower triangle. So in design, it would be the sacral center to the splenic center to the root to the solar plexus. And you have to get those energies figured out, because then when you gain the ability to be clear within yourself, you have the intellectual, emotional, and spiritual skills to sort out your own self direction. And then you have courage to speak up.
Mhm.
Because when you know what you know, you're not going to compromise
Mhm.
because you know it.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time because every time I leave home and I'm with people that I don't know that well, it's a great opportunity to take my design out for a spin. You know what I mean? Like I don't have old
Stop
connections.
thinking about your design.
No, I know. What I mean is, it's very difficult. It's very challenging, but I'm gone, and I say that knowing that I feel like I'm down to the last 20%, but it's been very uncomfortable, um, owning being me, owning just because I was such a pushover for so long with so many people. And in my local space, so many things have changed for me over the last 7 years. Physically, my appearance has changed. Like when you lose 120 pounds and you haven't seen someone in 2 years and they walk by you like they've never seen you before because you're so physically different. Then you throw a mohawk on it, and then you're just comfortable in your own skin. It's really easy to do that in another city because nobody knows me. I'm starting from ground zero. And then when I returned home, it was like, oof, there's that,
Projection onto you.
yeah, and it's almost wiped clean. And it's been so uncomfortable, but so valuable. Um, it's interesting. Like I almost want to leave home every month just to be like, okay, it's time for like take
You can
another.
take a day off in
Mhm.
your own home or out in nature.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I know from Marvin, um, he has to go out by himself 2, 3 times a week for a couple of hours or an afternoon and be in nature.
Mhm.
And he comes back, recentered.
Mhm.
I don't
Yeah.
do that. I sit down and write.
So writing centers you? That's interesting. So do you view that as creative or are you channeling at that point? Because when you describe writing, it's usually like you don't describe it as thinking about it. It's just
I don't
flow.
think about, no, I don't think. I mean, what I'm doing on the paths of intelligence requires some thinking.
Mhm.
Um, but once I start writing, it doesn't require any thinking.
Mhm.
It requires me knowing what I know. And then I sit down and there it is. So there's an intellectual gathering of information.
Mhm.
as to what needs to be included, what I think is important, that gets my process activated. And then I let it go and I don't think and I just write.
Mhm.
So, what were you wanting to ask me about a conversation we had in my kitchen?
I guess not so much ask you. I wanted to share my experience, but I also want you to, because in the moment, I was caught up in like an emotional. There was a moment. So I'll tell you what happened for me because I don't know how much you remember. But we were sitting in your kitchen. This is I guess almost 2 weeks ago, and for some reason, and it's interesting. But even like when I was asking about the 46 and integrity, I have really I believe I've really tried to live my life in integrity, even if I got the shit side of it. However, I also had commented to you that morning that it was like, why? Like I find myself exaggerating. I would be having a conversation with someone for some reason, I would take a number and double it. And and I don't want to do that because like I'm already like if there's one thing that I kind of love, I love this statement that a friend said to me years ago, which is tell the truth, it's easier to remember. I love that. It's so simple.
Mhm.
And I really think I live by that, except when I get to telling a story or telling something that I remember, I'll take a number and double it. Instead of 20 people being there, there'd be 40. And I'd be frustrated with myself, going like, why am I doing that? I don't even need to do that. Who am I trying to impress? And so I was telling you that, like I was just having this sort of epiphany of like, why do I still do this? And then I started talking about some people in my life, brother-in-laws and stuff that are in the military, and it just seems to be a theme with people I meet, especially in the Navy, where every story, like the fish gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I was like, dude, there's no way that happened to you, but they're so sure of it, right? And so it's frustrating. I'm like, there's no way that's true. You didn't, open the door for Princess Diana. That just didn't happen. I don't care what you say. No, actual story. Um, but in the moment, you said that's because when you were younger, you lacked courage. And in that moment, in my body, I was saying, fuck you. Like I was enraged when you said that, but it did not come. I know I didn't say it out loud, but inside I was so angry and I had to sit with it. But you were exactly correct. Like it was quite literally that when I was younger, and many times that compounded, I didn't have the courage to, I knew what I knew and I didn't stand up for it. And so for some reason, and then you had through that whole conversation, you used a term, it was like a clinical term or something, and it just all made sense for me. And I even just wanted to share that here because I think it actually happens to a lot of people where and the way you described it was in the moment and with these other people they wish they had handled the situation differently, and sort of as a protection mechanism they layer on, they lump on, and the story grows because it allows them to feel like they didn't do anything wrong at that time, and no one did anything wrong. They didn't have enough courage to
What
stand
they
up.
really wanted to do.
Yeah. And it was like massive for me. I can honestly say in the 2 weeks that have passed, I found myself not even exaggerating. I find myself actually going quite the opposite, being like, I have to pause and go, there were 19 people there, right? Like I don't even want to say 20. I don't want to round up a little bit, right? I just found that fascinating. But in the moment, I was so frustrated because I was in your kitchen. I wanted to shout. I was like, this is where I'm staying tonight. This is where my meals are coming from. I don't want to say what wants to come out, so I didn't do it.
Well, you
But
could have done it. I wouldn't have been offended.
yeah, well, I mean, I know that now. But and then I kind of just needed to internalize it. But it was like huge. And I just recognized it like people are doing that all over the place, like everywhere. And my head actually went through a bunch of stuff. But the word courage, it actually sent me down a whole rabbit hole of like the Wizard of Oz and the history of that movie, and that was a whole thing. Um,
That movie actually is extremely important, The Wizard of Oz, because it is a story about the development of the feminine and also the process of individuation.
Hmm.
And the elements in the world are represented by the creatures. So Ulanov, what was her first name? There's a Jungian author who, in her book about consciousness, talked about the Wizard of Oz and the archetypes that are delineated in that film. And that's why, actually, maybe Marvin and I will watch that over the weekend. We've been watching old movies
Hmm.
because some of the new movies are such junk
Hmm.
and they're so blatantly pornographic and violent. And we've been watching some old movies and finding not only are they delightful, but the lessons on the archetypes are much clearer
Hmm.
and cleaner. The Wizard of Oz is a good one in terms of the development of the feminine, especially, but also the characteristics of the four worlds.
Hmm. Yeah, I went down a whole rabbit hole with that, and that movie was like they did the transition from black and white to color as part of that movie. The
Mhm.
Wizard of Oz and the whole like this person that people looked up to, but turns out it was all bullshit behind the scenes. The fact that the one witch is basically trying to steal the dog, like really the whole motion, like it's all about what was the name? Wizard of Oz. What was the name of the woman's character? Dorothy. You know, it seemed to
Mhm.
be all about Dorothy, but really it was about this witch trying to steal her dog. like when you start to like take a step back, and the whole that whole movie is
Well,
very.
no,
I don't know
it
if you
was
watched
about
it.
Dorothy going home
Mhm.
and and the delusion of the world where you think one thing and because our consciousness is behind a veil,
Mhm.
you don't really see what's going on under the surface. And the creatures who came with her were creatures, one needed courage, one needed a heart,
Mhm.
one needed a head,
Mhm.
and Dorothy, the person, needed to go home to her soul
Get back home.
and to have her to know she was already empowered and she had forgotten that she was already home.
Yeah, and all
All
she had to
she
do was click
needed
her
to
heels together,
do
right?
was go inside.
Yeah. It's
So
interesting.
there
The
you
heels
you
bumping together. It's
the
the
root, the root, the root center to the
Mhm.
sacral center. Know what you know and get out of the physical world
Mhm.
and you're home.
Yeah, I might have to watch that again tonight. I
You
haven't seen that
believe
forever.
there's a great little book. I think I gave you a copy, As Man Thinketh.
Yeah, I got halfway through it on the airplane, but my eyes were fading. As soon as you said that, I gotta go. It's in my laptop bag. It's right here.
But yes, any of the people watching the podcast, if you haven't watched The Wizard of Oz of late, it is talking about the four worlds
Mhm.
and the four worlds inside of us. Now, I remember seeing that movie when I was a kid uh, and being terrified of the witch. And I would hide. I'd put my head in my mother's lap when the witch came on. And I've probably seen that movie 50 to 100 times.
Wow. Mhm.
When I was a child, uh, sort of preteen, I became extremely interested in movies. And some movies I saw 15, 20 times. And I lived in New York. I would go to movies that I was interested in seeing and get a ticket for Radio City Music Hall. And I'd go into the theater at about 10 in the morning when they opened. And I sit through all of the showings until it was going to get dark. And then I would hop on the subway and go home.
Hmm.
So I would see the movie 3 or 4 times in one day.
Wow.
And you could just sit through, and there was the 2 hour movie, and then there was a stage show with the Rockettes and, and a half-hour entertainment, and then the movie would come on again.
Hmm.
So I would do that. And um, I watched many first-run movies that way. And I had a friend who was crazy enough to go with me
Mhm.
and sit through it with me. And I learned a great deal from some of those movies, like The King and I, or Gigi, or My Fair Lady, or My Fair Lady, I actually saw on Broadway with Julie Andrews.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and then, of course, I saw the movie. Breakfast at Tiffany's. Um, there was so many movies that had consciousness in them and were laying out the development of the personality at a higher level of consciousness than where they started at the beginning. And you don't see that so much in movies anymore.
Mhm.
Um, so I actually said to my son the other day, I think you need to have your kids watch some of the old movies so they can learn about femininity and feminine wiles and consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah, movies have changed a great deal. I want to circle back to the courage thing still. And again, with the Wizard of Oz and the lion not having courage, I'm still revisiting that. But back to that moment in the kitchen, it was like I experienced so many things in like 10 seconds. Like it was overwhelming. It just like flooded me and
Marvin would say my Sag shot an arrow.
yeah, it was you caused a short circuit. But the other part of it was and it's when Apple, like the company Apple and the iPhone, this is probably 9 years ago, I guess now, when they stopped putting the audio jack, like for your headphones, they said, like, we're only doing the lightning cable. And the funny things at the time, I remember thinking, awesome. That means the phone can be more waterproof, like all these benefits. And so I thought it was a great thing, being a technology kind of guy and someone that likes to see things progress. And but it was so interesting to observe that whole time because it's kind of what's going on right now too. Was one of the developers in their big announcement said, it took great courage to decide to get rid of this audio jack and replace it with a lightning jack, right?
Mhm.
And I was like, yeah, I guess it does. But then there was a media shitstorm because everybody started virtue signaling and saying like, oh, courage, like storming the beaches of Normandy, courage. And all of a sudden it like took this notion that was going to change an industry and it completely got flipped over by people
Who
to the
didn't
point,
want to change.
yeah, but in such a kind of gross way, like such extreme criticism, like all of a sudden they get to own the word courage, right? And so it's funny, like that word, I didn't when you said I didn't have courage, I felt that head to toe. Like you were exactly correct. It took me right to the nub of the root. And it's just we're not even allowed to use certain words anymore because people will just jump down your throat and make you feel bad for like language is nuts right now. It's frustrating. So, anyways, that word courage is still
I often have said that without this guy, I would not have had the courage.
Mhm.
And I say that because I took a lot of shit growing up. for having courage and speaking up and calling people out. And when when I was on my own, away from my family of origin and in a different city, and, I was married, but there was a lot of pressure on me to comply with academic policy.
Mhm.
And I couldn't. When I taught college, the first year, it was just sort of part-time. I was teaching testing, psychological testing, and a lab where I taught people how to do IQ tests. And I'd observe them and rate them and all of that. So and I was pregnant. It was, easy, nothing. But when I was teaching full time and teaching 4 psych classes, um, I, for one thing, I went for the interview when I was 7 months pregnant. Nobody knew I was pregnant. And I said to them, if you hire me, I will only work 2 days a week. And I don't care how many preparations you give me. They gave me 4, but I will only work 10 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, no breaks. And I did that because I wanted to be home with my kids.
Mm.
And I refused to go to any of the administrative stuff. So imagine really needing a job in order to get back to Chicago and to finish my PhD, although I could have finished it otherwise anyhow. But I wanted to get back there. And the commitment I had with my ex-husband was that I would get a job. So I applied to teach, and I set boundaries. I will only do it if I can do it in a way that would be right for me. And, it allowed me the time to finish my dissertation, to do my study, to be with my kids, and to honor myself. And it was this guy, because the first night I had him, and I've told that story, where he jumped at me and looked me right in the eye, and we knew each other. And he protected me and stood up for me. And the message to me from him was, if you love me this much, and we are so connected on a spiritual level, I have to honor that. And I can't compromise that. And he controlled me, that cat. He wouldn't let me leave. He wouldn't let me travel. In the, starting in when he was about, how old was he? About 11, he would not let me leave. If I left on a trip, I'd come home and he'd be sick. And if I took him with me, he'd be sick, which happened from the time he was a baby. But the last 10 years, 11 years of his life, I never left.
Mm.
I stayed with him constantly. And he gave me so much
Mm.
that without him, I don't think I would have had the courage.
Mm. I think so many things.
Also, I think, growing up as a child, my parents always said to me, do what you think is right. We trust you. They never told me what to do.
Mhm. Yeah, I didn't have that.
Most people don't.
Yeah.
Most people don't. But they couldn't have done it any other way with me.
Mhm. We're actually getting a couple of comments here. I wonder if there's any questions.
What are the comments?
Well, Stephanie was said, all I hear is my stroke. Cleans, empties, free. So it was when you were talking about swimming, I think. Mundane Mystic, who's actually, I can even put that one on the screen here because it's handy. Wonderful synchronicity. Just earlier today, I was having a discussion with a friend about courage versus bravery.
Mm.
Courage is fear and wisdom, where bravery is foolish because it denies or suppresses fear. Yeah, that's interesting. Even just in the context that we were talking before of storming the beaches of Normandy, like
When you
is
know,
that courage or is that bravery or is it sacrifice for someone
um,
else's
for
mission?
people, for people who fought in a war like that, if they believed in the war, if they knew they were on the right side of truth and humanity and were fighting for freedom, it meant possibly sacrificing themselves and their life for a higher purpose. That's courage. And in some ways, it's bravery because you know you could get killed. For the people who don't believe in it, it's pure bravery because they're doing something they don't believe in, but they're doing it because they feel they must. Now,
Mhm.
it may be stupid bravery because they're doing something that they don't believe in, and they're doing it for external approval. And maybe it's karmic, or maybe they transform and believe. We don't know.
Mhm. Hmm. Like a war today would be drones. It would be, it's not person to person combat where you're even looking the other person in the eye and thinking about what you're doing or, like war just doesn't even make
No,
sense.
in Israel right now, it is person to person.
Oh, for sure, there. But I mean, in general, the
Well,
next.
but that is what war is. There are the people always who have to be on the ground for
Mhm,
intel
mhm,
and who believe something. And unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation that and unconsciousness. I mean, if you're really conscious, you don't go to war. It's the people going to war are not only they're evil.
mhm,
War is just plain evil.
100%. And
And
sorry.
and most of the deep state, well, I won't say that.
Yeah,
You're gonna have to cut that.
yeah, no, we just stopped it right there. Yeah, from what I understand, like in World War II, if you decided I can't go into battle, you were shot as you left as a traitor, right? So there was consequences no matter kind of what you did.
Mhm.
Um,
And there
I,
were a lot of people who dodged the draft,
mhm,
who lied and cheated to get out of it.
mhm. Yeah, and that's a whole thing, right? I mean, the war on drugs and I've talked many times about LSD, for example. LSD was captured, patented, because people were thinking for themselves. They didn't want to go to war. They didn't want to kill people. They were feeling connected to something, and so they criminalized that, and lumped it in with other drugs. Um, And I think we're just kind of like right back to that place where there's a lot of people that have been opening up and exploring and would say, no, I'm not going to war. I guess you'll have to shoot me.
Mhm.
And I wonder how many people would actually be willing uh, today. I don't think it'd be many. So it becomes, yeah, it's just
Well,
a very strange thing.
we're, we are learning to be conscious as human beings.
Mhm,
And we're at an age where consciousness is opening up.
mhm,
And unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation about consciousness and about in the field of psychology, also misinformation
mhm,
because spirit is left out of it.
mhm,
And spirit is left out of most organized religion.
mhm, mhm. Okay, I've been wanting to talk about this for the last bit too. And I think I sent this to you as a text. I don't know if we've actually talked about it, but I think I told you that my left index toe has been like a conduit to spirit for me or something. And I've got that metaphysical book my magic book, and it talks about the left foot, which is more a feminine energy side, and that left index toe is apparently very much about connection to spirit. And in the last 6 months, the only way to describe it is I feel like I'm coming online. The spirit was stamped out of me, just didn't exist. And now it's there, it's flowing. And I think I told you on my mother's side, so my grandfather, who was a Mason, and I think I said like actually worked on a flying saucer in Canada for the US. So even that's a whole strange thing that was never shared with me. But his left index toe and my mother's and her sister are quite literally almost deformed. Like they fold over top of their big toe.
Mm.
All on my mother's side, from my grandfather and their two daughters, and um, it's like their body was physically resisting a connection to spirit, for lack and like to the point where like my mom and her sister won't go barefoot. They're embarrassed by this toe overhanging their big toe. It was so interesting just reading that book and then my conversations with you and all these connections to spirit. Like this toe is now it some days my foot feels amazing, and then other days where it's almost like my spirit is being constricted. It gets sore and I have to like massage it and twist it. When I've done Reiki a few times with Wendy, that toe comes online and it's it's I'm just
Have
like,
you
oh,
talked to it?
I think I am. I've not thought of it as a dialogue, but I'm
Do it as a
interacting.
dialogue.
Yeah. What is it?
Do it as a dialogue.
With myself.
Sean says, toe. There must be a story
Mhm.
beyond that I am missing pieces of that would help me fully connect and realign to you. What do you know about this? And then Toe says, whatever it says. And then Sean says, whatever he says. And then Toe says, whatever it says. And what that does is it gives you inner permission to speak to your own spirit and to the spirit of that part of your body that has a message that you're thinking it has to give you. And so if you dialogue with it, when you write, a lot of times, and I would say, when I journal, I always do it in handwriting because it flows more from the unconscious through the kinesthetic and bypasses the chatter within the mind. So that's why I did all of those worksheets,
Mhm.
because it also helps to break it down into world if you get there.
Yeah, I have to revisit that again. I really struggle. I still
Do
do
it
it.
once, Sean, and you
Hmm?
won't be sorry.
Okay, I will.
If you do it and have an experience, when I really understood the power of the dialogue, now I'd already been in Jungian training. I already, had read all the books and done my own journaling. But one of our cats, the one that my daughter was most attached to, suddenly died. And she was so traumatized. And it was right around her high school prom. So she went out to the prom, but she was devastated. And I thought, what do I do? How do I get my daughter through this grief? He was her soul cat.
Mhm.
So I asked in a dialogue, um, my daughter is suffering and I don't know what to do. Please, you know, Tippy, the name of the cat, what do I need to tell her? And he came through to me. And I got 4 pages written of dialogue with him. And when she came home, I gave it to her to read. And not only that, but it so happened that a patient had given me a candle for Christmas, and I had never burned it. And I moved it, and it was sitting on my bookshelf. And I walked over to it and I lit the candle. And it so happened that Tippy died on Jung's birthday or death day, I don't remember which. And the candle was right in front of his Memories, Dreams, Reflections book,
Mhm.
the book that when I was 15 turned me on to Jung.
Mhm.
So, and the next day, a piece of corn from a dried ear of corn that was in a cabinet that was closed appeared in an African violet that my daughter had in her room. And Tippy used to take the kernels of corn and he used to eat the leaves of the African violet.
Mhm.
So we got signs of his presence. And having read the dialogue and him saying, I am fine, here's what, is going on. My daughter was, you know, healed, still sad, but not distraught in the same way.
Hmm.
Power of active imagination, as Jung called it, or
Mhm.
dialogues. One of the most significant dialogues I ever did was the Stepping Stones one, and Paths Taken and Not Taken. What would my life have been like if I hadn't married my first husband? What if I had decided to not have the kids I had? What if I hadn't gone to India? What if I hadn't gone to Taos and met Rob?
Mhm.
Those kinds of turning points, so important.
I'm still taken aback that you were reading Young at 15. I was thinking me at 15, I was probably playing with Transformers. So very different
My sister,
teenagers.
my middle sister gave me The Little Prince to read when I was 11. I still have the copy. Um, one of my favorite books when I was in third grade was Alice in Wonderland. I memorized the poems in it. Um, my middle sister while I was growing up, tuned into my soul. She saved my soul.
Mhm.
And was she was 11 years older than me. So she was already, when she gave me Jung, she was already getting her PhD at University of Chicago from the Committee on Social Thought, which was a um, religion, classical literature, um, and sort of mysticism all in one department, philosophy.
Mhm.
And Jung is in the blood of my family. Um, a cousin on both sides was Ira Progoff, who instituted Dialogue House, and he was trained by Jung. And my sister was fascinated with Jung. So she gave me Memories, Dreams, Reflections, knowing full well that it would touch my soul, which it did. And I determined then and there that I was going to be a Jungian. I was going to study Jung.
Mhm.
And I started reading the collected works. But when I was 7, I was reading books on yoga and sitting in my room in a double lotus position.
Mhm. So
So
many.
I came in with a spiritual core.
Mhm.
Not everybody does. Some people come in with other issues. And I did need, as a child, to stand up to those in my family who would rather not have heard the truth.
Mhm.
And, my brother was pretty mean to me, chasing me around with a hairbrush. And he was 16 years older than me and
Mhm.
threatening me. And he didn't want consciousness.
Mhm.
He was a researcher. He was the head of a research at I think it was Kansas Research, Midwest Research or Kansas. He lived in Kansas. He's the head of a whole research think tank, doing research on dreams.
Mhm.
And yet
And
he
yet,
was
yeah.
not spiritual. So some people do that because they're challenged to prove spirituality when they've denied it. So it's almost like God is hitting them on the head and saying, wake up, wake up.
Mhm.
My brother, in the later years of his life, was reading the I Ching,
Oh, okay.
but said to me, "Oh, Elle, how can you study astrology?" And I looked at him and I said, "And how can you not?"
Mhm. So many things.
Well,
I
we should stop pretty soon.
okay. Um,
Any other comments or questions?
yeah, there's a couple in there. Name is tuning in. This convo is amazing. So many aha truth nuggets. I agree. Thank you for bringing in the courage theme and vulnerability and truth of your experience. Okay, here's a question. This is from Name. Has Dr. Eleanor seen Inside Out 1 or 2, and does she find it cleanly offers our internal worlds? Now, if I remember correctly, that's a Pixar movie, I think.
I did not see it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a Pixar movie, right? Where they're like inside the girl's brain and they're all pulling little switches. Anyway, it's a very cute movie. And I think there was a second one recently. So funny enough, my daughter was watching that last week. I might have to check that out. So yeah, no comment on that one. Um, I have a question for you because I realized. So yesterday I was talking to my new friend Topher that is going to reach out to you, I think, shortly here.
Oh, he was in the
Yes.
meeting yesterday.
It was, yeah, yeah, and of all the folks that were in Santa Fe, he was the only manifester that was actually a manifester in all
Huh.
4 worlds. So we had a great like we met for what was going to be 2 hours, and I think we hung out for like 6 or 7, and then went to that star dreaming place, and it was very interesting. Like, what is it like? I just had so many questions about a manifester versus, a manifesting generator, and it was neat. He was asking all sorts of questions yesterday about you and your background. And I realized that while we were talking today, that I don't know that you've ever said how Ra found you, because I think Ra found you, right? He reached
No.
out to you and Marvin. Oh, okay.
Well, yes. Um, I discovered human design in March of 1996. I studied privately with Zeno. And
Okay.
then when Ra came to Taos in October of 1997, I went to that meeting
Okay.
and studied advanced human design. I already had been certified as an analyst, I believe. And I showed up the first day. I had scheduled a whole day of readings with Ra, like 4 readings, 5 readings. So I wanted to have readings on everyone in my family from Ra. So I showed up at Zeno's house to meet with Ra for a whole day. And I was a professional. So I was used to going to professional meetings. And I was dressed professionally in a high class suit and perfectly groomed. And I was a sannyasin. So as soon as Ra knew that I was a sannyasin, I was on the inside. And as a student in the class, the only clothes I brought were professional clothes.
Mhm.
I thought it would be a professional meeting, not a hippie meeting.
Mhm.
And he could see that I was a serious student and I asked very serious questions. And I took the ball and I ran with it as a professional. So after the first class with Ra in 97, I began, well, I did more than one class. Yeah, well, it was 98 that I broke with him. So in 97, he came and stayed with Marvin and me for, I want to say 2 to 3 weeks in September. And then I went to Taos. Oh, that can't be. No, I went to Taos in September, October of 97. I went back to Taos in May of 98 and again another time. So I went to Taos 3 or 4 times to take whatever he was teaching when he was in town. So I took whatever classes he gave, 3 or 4, 5 classes. And then in May of 97, I invited him to come to California and stay with us, and I would fill his schedule. And so he came and stayed in our home for, I think, 2.5 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. And I scheduled him with like 8 to 10 clients a day, all cash. And he saw how we lived. We lived in the best area in Pacific Palisades, California, across from the Riviera Country Club. We had a huge house with a pool, and at that time we had ducks in our pool and 11 cats.
Was the
And
house, you were also like a block away from OJ as well? Is that the same house?
not from OJ. Michael Keaton lived across the street.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
Dom DeLuise lived down the block. Shelley Long lived across the street. And I worked on all of her projects.
Hmm.
Um, I had credit on some of the shows.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Like on Cheers?
oh yeah. Um,
That's funny.
um, so I was in the movie business at the time I met Ra. I also had a private practice. I was also an astrologer because I had studied astrology very intensively to get Catherine de Jersey secrets. And she was my best friend in my life to that point. I own the rights to all of her materials. So I spent a lot of time with Ra. And then in 1998, Zeno arranged for Ra to come and stay at a fancy hotel and didn't treat my clients the way I treat my clients. And so I didn't send anyone to Ra at the hotel. And it so happened that in October, when I had taken a class in Taos, I proposed continuing to teach design as I was doing, studying the transits and studying it more scientifically, etc. And Zeno did not want me to do so because I was charging more per session than she could charge.
Mm.
And I said, I'm a licensed professional and I can't charge less than my session fee. So Ra asked me to stop what I was doing. And that didn't sit well with me.
Mhm.
He didn't have the integrity to stand up for the material and what was right for me as a professional
Mhm.
who had gone way out of my way to advance his system more than anyone else, really. So I didn't do anything. I was still involved in design. I stopped doing my Friday evening classes. I stopped talking about transits. I went back to being a professional. And when he came in February, he was supposed to spend a day with me, and I thought we could talk. But Zeno called him back, and I spent no time with him. I basically chauffeured him. And then he charged my daughter full fee for a baby's reading. And our agreement was that he wouldn't charge me for all of what we had given him. And usually a baby was half price. So there was no professional courtesy, there was no honoring of a commitment, there was no integrity. So I pulled out. I wanted nothing more to do with him. I was done. And he knew it. Um, and it was a year later, in 1999, March, I believe, or May or April maybe, where I think it was Chaitan who called and said, Ra's in trouble and needs money. And would you let him and his family come and stay at your home? And there would be him and his two kids. And Marvin and I talked it over. And even though I wanted nothing to do with him, he was the messenger with a system that I had to honor.
Mhm.
So I said yes. And he came in an attitude of respect and somewhat humbled and saw that we didn't hold a grudge and that I had some pretty powerful contacts. Uh, and we filled his schedule as we said we would.
Mhm.
And it was at that trip, within a few days, that he said, would you two, I think more Marvin than me, would you validate this scientifically and medically? And I said, I didn't want to. And Marvin said yes. And so
Mhm.
I deferred to Marvin, which meant I, as the social scientist, would be doing the data. And we were asked if we would form a legal partnership, 50-50, and that we would teach professionals and be outside the human design community. He was breaking with Zeno and Chaitanya. And when he began to cheat by double dipping and doing things behind our back, I called him out on it. And that's when he formed Jovian, which he said would be the dumbed down version of human design for the general public, and that I should do what I was doing for professionals and stay away from the human design community. So that's what I did.
So many questions. My first one is right back to the beginning, because in 1996, 97, there was no Google. How did you find the human design system? Because there wouldn't have been a
There was
lot
an
of.
ad in the Mountain Astrologer magazine.
Really? That's where you found it?
Of the mandala. And because I was a Jungian analyst, I recognized it. I was already fairly versed in the Tree of Life. I was already an astrologer. I had already studied, hold on a second. Marvin's asking me a question I have to answer. So I knew all the disciplines and I recognized the mandala. What I didn't have was the matrices. And ultimately, because Ra asked us to validate it scientifically, God's hand, and he told me as much, that when he met me the first day and met Marvin, he knew we needed to scientifically validate it. He was, I mean, the voice obviously told him.
Did Ra have a connection to spirit, or was he on the like confused by all that? Because like, did he have one prior to the voice, or was that such a
He was on drugs all the
asking
time.
him?
He
Yeah.
was on ketamine and marijuana and God knows what else.
Mhm.
And he lived in Ibiza. Need we say more?
Well, I don't know much about Ibiza.
It's drug haven.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mm.
I need to go.
Okay.
So save your questions for next time.
Yeah, there'll always be plenty. So
And next week, we could meet on Friday.
okay.
And we could meet, now let's see, I have a Reiki class at 3 and a Reiki class on the 18th at 3. Sorry about the error.
Yeah, no worries.
So if we meet, the Reiki's at 3, we could do 1 o'clock or
Uh,
12 o'clock.
yeah, that works. I'll send you something afterwards.
Okay, good.
Okay. Say hi to Martin
And
for me.
I have not looked at what you sent me yesterday about the Cosmic Guidance book. I will look at that tonight or tomorrow morning.
Yeah, just whatever you think. I can see like I'm doing it every day anyways, and I just thought sharing it,
That
it
would be
might.
fine. I think it's fine with me.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Take care.
Lovely to
Thank you,
see you.
Sean. Thank
Have a
you,
good one.
whoever's on the call. And it's my pleasure. Always feel free to email me with questions, ehp@noblesciences.com.
Oh, something she just dropped off, so I guess we'll end there. Have a good day, everybody.